Hello guys, good morning to all of you. And today we'll discuss the unit 4 of the topic, the portrait of a lady. And in the previous chapter, we had known that how the grandma was separated from his grandson, and it was very painful for her. And in the city house, she took to feeding the sparrows in the afternoon, and it was the happiest moment for her in the afternoon after she got separated from his grandson. Now in chapter 4, we'll see, when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. Now it was decided that the writer would go for higher studies into foreign countries. I was sure my grandmother would be upset, and the writer was quite confident, quite sure. He was certain that it would not be possible on the part of his grandmother to tolerate his absence, and his grandmother would be upset. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age one could never tell, and the writer was to stay abroad for 5 years, and one can never tell what would happen to her during his absence. But grandmother could, says the writer, meaning it was his grandmother that who could tolerate his absence. She was not even sentimental. Even grandmother did not show any emotion. She was not broken-hearted at the time of the writer's departure to foreign countries for higher studies. She came to leave me at the railway station. The grandmother came to give a send-off to the writer at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. Still then she was not at all emotional, though she loved him so much that the writer was the jewel of her eyes. Still then she was not broken-hearted, and she was not at all emotional or sentimental. She did not display any emotional. Her lips moved in prayer. She was busy counting the beads of her rosary, so her lips were moving in prayer, and her mind was lost in prayer, and she was engrossed in prayer. Her mind was lost, meaning she was engrossed. She was deep in her prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary, and she was busy counting the beads of her rosary silently, and she kissed my forehead because she would not break her prayers. Therefore, she silently came and kissed his forehead. And when I left, says the writer, when he left, I cherished the most imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. I preserved in my mind, I preserved in my heart the moist imprint of her kiss. Moist meaning wet, drenched. Imprint meaning something printed. The wet imprint, the moist imprint of her kiss, he cherished in his heart, he preserved in his heart. It's perhaps the last sign of a physical contact between him and his grandmother. But that was not so. Means the writer had thought that the grandmother may not survive because it would be too painful for her to tolerate his absence, and that did not happen. And after 5 years, I came back home, and after 5 years, after the completion of his studies, the writer came back home and was met by her at the railway station, and the grandmother went to the railway station to receive the writer. She did not look any older. The writer was amazed to see that his grandmother did not look a day older. She was still in the same age before 5 years. Her appearance had not changed. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, the grandmother hugged the grandmother, embraced the writer in her arms. I could hear her reciting her prayer, but at that time she was not crying, she was not weeping, not shedding tears, she was not emotional, she was not broken-hearted, and at that time the writer could hear that she was reciting, she was singing her prayer, she was counting the beads of her rosary. On the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, and she spent her time with the sparrows on the first day of the writer's arrival, whom she fed longer. And and with frivolous rebukes. The grandmother was so affectionate towards birds that she loved the birds so much that she looked upon the birds. She considered the birds to be her as if they were her grandchildren, and she rebuked them affectionately. Frivolous rebukes means affectionate rebukes. In the evening, a change came over her. Towards the evening, on the day on which the writer returned from abroad, a change came over her. It seemed that the grandmother was awaiting the arrival of his grandson, the writer. She did not pray that evening. She collected the women of the neighborhood and she invited all the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum and started to sing, getting an old drum, she started to sing for several hours, and she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum, and she continued beating the drum for several hours and sang a song. And the drum she thumped, meaning she beat the sagging skins, meaning the weak or hanging skins of the dilapidated drum. Dilapidated meaning almost broken, in a broken stage. Dilapidated drum which was not used for a long time, so it was dilapidated, and sang of the homecoming of the warriors. And she sang a song, the homecoming of the warriors. Here the warrior was his grandson, the writer, and she sang this song, and at the same time she thumped her drum among the women of the neighborhood. We had to persuade her to stop, to avoid overstraining, and the writer and the members of his family asked her not to thump the drum for a long time, to avoid overstraining, not to take too much pressure. This was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray, and the writer had known his grandmother praying all the time, but this is the first time. This was the first time the writer saw her. She did not pray. The next morning she was taken ill because of perhaps the overstraining that she took while thumping the drum last night. The pressure made her sick. The next morning she was taken ill, meaning she fell ill. She was sick. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go, and that perhaps took the grandma to the doctor, consulted the doctor, and the doctor said that it was a mild fever, meaning slight fever. The doctor told us that it would go, and the doctor predicted that her fever would subside. But my grandmother thought differently. But my grandmother, being an experienced lady, she thought differently. She had some different ideas in her mind. She told us that her end was near. The grandma made a horrible prediction that her death was near, her end. And meaning death was near, meaning she was going to die. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the chapter of her life here, grandma becomes slightly philosophical, and she says that she is going to close the last chapter of her life. She is going to play the role in the last chapter of her life drama. She omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So the grandmother advised them that I don't want to waste any more time talking to us. You all please leave the place and let me pray. We protested. The writer and his family members, they all protested. They objected to what grandma said. But she ignored our protest. She did not pay heed to our protest. She lay peaceful. She was lying peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads, lying peacefully in bed. She was counting the beads of a rosary. Even before we could suspect her lips stopped, but suddenly her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers, and the writer and the members of his family saw that her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell off her lifeless fingers, and a peaceful pallor meaning her face lost its brightness, meaning a peaceful pallor meaning lack of brightness spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead, and all the members of the writer's family came to the conclusion that grandma had lost his life, she had passed away, she was dead. Then we lifted her off the bed, and then the writer's family lifted grandmother off the bed, from the bed, and as it customary, it is according to the custom of the sick people, as it customary, laid her on the ground. They put the dead and covered her dead body with a red shroud. A shroud is a piece of cloth which is covered on a dead body. This is the custom of the Sikh people or the Punjabis. After a few hours of mourning, meaning all the family members mourned the death of grandma, meaning they wept, they cried, they expressed sorrows, and they condoled the death of grandma. As we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral, then the writer and his members of his family went to make arrangements for her cremation. In the evening, we went to a room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. In the evening time, all of them went to the grandma's room where she was lying dead with a crude stretcher, meaning an old-fashioned stretcher, to take her to be cremated in order to take her to the crematoriums where she would be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. It was the time of sunset, and her room and veranda was colored with the blaze of golden sunlight. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda, and in her room right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. They had come to condole the death of grandma, and there was no chirruping, there was no singing. They were extremely broken-hearted, and they felt disappointed, and we felt sorry for the birds. My mother fetched some bread for them, and the writer's mother brought some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and the writer's mother broke the pieces of bread into little crumbs, in little bits, just like the grandmother, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread, but the sparrows were unhappy. They were so much broken-hearted, they were so disappointed, and they did not even take notice of the breadcrumbs. When we carried my grandmother's corpse meaning dead body, when we carried my grandmother's dead body up, they flew away quietly, and it seemed that sparrows had come to condole the death of grandma, to express their sorrows and anguish at the death of the grandma. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Next morning, the sweeper of the writer's house swept away the breadcrumbs and put them into dustbin. With this, the grandma's immaculate relationship, great relationship, divine relationship with the birds came to an end. And here concludes the Unit 4 of the topic, the portrait of a lady. Here ends the chapter 4, and if you like it and share it, then subscribe it to your friends. Thanking all of you once again.